Is he not upset about this? Why do we let this man do what? Stand there and do what? Just mock us, to defy God, defy our God. Why are we allowing this to happen? And he goes and slays Goliath. In chapter 18, David appoints him as leader in hopes that what will happen to David. He started to develop a jealousy of him, and for what reason? What was David starting to get from Israel, from the people? A lot of praise, a lot of recognition. If you'll remember, what was the saying? What was the phrase that had went on? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000. If Saul had been a man of honor, Saul would have said what? Good job, because it was for the better of Israel, for their nation. But he wasn't. So he appoints David. He does see the leadership qualities in him. He appoints him in hopes that David would end up in battle. His own father. He protected David from Saul, the king. Do you defy the king? This is the first king of Israel, but do you defy the king? Ever? What happens if you do? That's it. That's it. So David flees from Saul in 1 Samuel chapter 21. And then in 1 Samuel chapter 22, David had fled from Saul and he had escaped from him. Saul finds out where he had been, and he found some men that had protected him, and he had them killed. Who were those men? They weren't just common men. They weren't just men in this city. They weren't just men holed up at this fortress. Who did he have killed? Priests. The priests of God, for protecting David. He had them killed. It tells us what Saul is and how he is, and the arrogance that he has. But as we go into 1 Samuel chapter 23, we start seeing David now starts asking God for guidance. Is David yet the king? He's not. As of yet, he is not. So let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 23 if you're not there. And we're going to read about what is going on here. It says, Then they told David, saying, Look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are robbing the threshing floors. Therefore David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, Go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, Look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? Then David inquired of the Lord once again. And the Lord answered him and said, Arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your hand. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, and took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. So David goes to the Lord asking for guidance. It may be the first time we've really seen this, maybe another time or two. But do you think that's the only time that David had sought God for guidance and advice? How often did he do it? Probably every day, probably multiple times a day. Should I go? Should I go do this? The Philistines are attacking this city. Should I go? And the first time he asks him, God says what? Go. But there's some apprehension here from David's men. Are David's men afraid to go fight the Philistines? God told them go. Are they afraid to go fight the Philistines? Absolutely not. What are they afraid of? They said, we're afraid here in Judah. Who are they afraid of? They're not afraid of who they're going to fight in front. Who are they afraid of? Who's coming behind them? Who's pursuing them? Saul is. They're constantly having to worry about. So David, you're telling us we're going to go into battle with the Philistines, who we fight time and time again. We're going to go fight them, but the whole time we have to look over our shoulder and make sure that Saul's not coming. They're going to get caught, aren't they? That's what they're afraid of. So David goes to God again and says, what? Are you what? Are you sure? Is that where you want us to go? Yep. They are between the Mediterranean. I've got a map here that talks about this time here. It's Keilah is actually, it looks like it is, I guess that would be east and south and east of Jerusalem. It looks like it's as dead in the center between the Mediterranean and the Dead Sea. Of course, a lot of the towns at this time, or a lot of these cities, have different names, but Keilah doesn't appear to be all that far from Bethlehem. It's in that area. Yeah, they're in Judah, and actually, when you look at the map, you see the Philistia, you see a lot of these that are probably occupied by these other nations, but the cities here, they show. I wish I didn't think I should have had a graphic for that and tried to show it, but yeah, they're in Judah. But the whole time they're there, they're having to worry about Saul, aren't they? And now they hear, but the call to protect Israel from the Philistines is very what? Is it very strong for them? Lord, do we go? Yes, go, the men say. But we have to worry about Saul. We have to worry about him coming. The Lord says, go. Go take care of the people of Keilah. So when he asks again, he tells him to go, and then it says David and his men go, and that's what they do. So we kind of ask, would God be upset with us asking again? We ask him and he answers, and then we ask again. Human nature says sometimes we really need some what? We need some reassurance. Okay? Go do this. Gideon, he requested of God what? Well, prove to me. And God proved it to him. Then he's like, what? Prove it again. Is he testing God? Is David testing God by asking him here again? The first command to David understood we're going to go, told his men we're going to go. But the men are concerned. Who needed this answer? Did David need this second answer? Who needed it? The men did. They needed to know. They needed to know that God said go. He will take care of us. Okay? So David wasn't unsure of the command, but his men were concerned, and they needed that reassurance. If you've got one leader that goes into battle and he's confident, and the 300 or 400 behind you are not, are you going to win? Probably not, Chad. We always kind of talk about sports, don't we? You know, if you've got one on the field confident and 10 that aren't, are we going to succeed? We could even say if you have 10 on the field that are confident and one that isn't, the chances of being successful, we've diminished that. It's not a problem for David to ask again. He wanted to make sure his men understood God said go. And that's what he did. So the men were concerned. They needed the reassurance. So let's look at verse 6 as we go on. It says, now it happened when Abithar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with an ephod in his hand. Verse 7, and Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, and Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. Then Saul called all the people together for war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. So now in these verses, Saul, seeking to destroy David, Do you ever think the men that are with Saul, do they know who David is? Yes. Do they know what David has done and what he has accomplished? Do you think for them it was a difficult thing we're going to fight David? You had to follow the command of who? You had to follow the command of Saul. You had to understand that this is the king we're going to follow. But do you ever think they questioned it? If David's men questioned the command to go, Saul's men did. Saul has slain his thousands. That's us. But David and his men have slain the 10,000. That's them. Yeah. They knew being with Saul, I think, did they see the things that David did were blessed? I mean, did they hear the stories? They knew the things. And they probably realized with Saul that what? These things aren't what? They aren't the same. We go back all the way back into Genesis with Joseph. Wherever Joseph was and when he was enslaved. When he was a slave, he was in Potiphar's house. When he was in the prison and became a chief of the prison guard, those around him who were not his allies, they were basically, he was owned by them. They recognized what? God was what? They recognized this guy was different. God's with him. And I think you have to imagine these men of Saul, even though you're loyal to the king, you have to have seen, and David is blessed. There's some things with him that are blessed. Yeah, they had to follow they definitely had to follow the command of the king, and jealousy, they could probably see that. But Saul has it in his mind that this city of Keilah must be very fortified. So we're going to get David in there. He's going to be distracted fighting with the Philistines, and we're just going to sneak in and do what? We're going to destroy. But Saul's hope was also, well, maybe by the time we get there, the Philistines have done what? They've done our dirty work for us. Wouldn't that be better for Saul if that happened? To have somebody else do it than himself? Definitely would be. So Saul plans for a war as they get there. So let's get to verse 9. It says, when David knew Saul plotted evil against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. Then David said, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has certainly heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. Will the men of Keilah deliver me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, your God of Israel, I pray, tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, they will deliver you. So David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah and went wherever they could go. Then it was told of Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he halted the expedition. So we've already seen David ask God twice, should I go? Answers yes both times. Now he goes to God again and he says what? He knows Saul is what? He knows Saul's coming. He knows Saul's coming after him. He knew that Saul was coming, but David's concern was not only for himself and his men, it was also for who? The people of Keilah. Why was he concerned about them? He had just saved them. They were going to save them in this battle. Well, why was he concerned about them? How does the city feel about David? It's kind of a twofold question. How do they feel about him right now? The battle's over. They beat the Philistines. They saved the city. How do they feel about him? Very happy. Praises to David. He has slain the Philistines. But now the king's coming. Saul's coming. And when Saul comes, he's going to ask us to do what? Turn David over. Are they going to do it? What'd God say? Yes, sir. They're going to turn him over. They will turn you over. Why? Why would they turn David over who just saved them? You got to follow the king, and if you don't, what happens? Yeah, they were way more afraid of Saul than the Philistines. I mean, would they have a defense against Saul, really? Philistines you can fight against. I mean, you find yourself in a little bit of a dilemma there when you're fighting against Saul if he's trying to destroy you. Would Saul, we know Saul, would his mindset, would he destroy the city if they helped David? Better believe. Why would he? How do we know that? We just talked a few minutes ago about who did he destroy? Who did he destroy that helped David before? He killed the priests. What would save a city? So David knows by his presence he is endangering who? The city. Everyone around him. The men that are with him, but the city themselves. Those who are innocent, who couldn't protect themselves from the Philistines, he knows, if I'm here, they're in danger. If they help me, they're in danger. So what does he do? They take off and they leave. Okay? It's interesting in the verse when we have to look at this and we say, you kind of question the city and their loyalty. It has to be to the king. But Saul heard that what? Saul heard that David had, the word is very important there in my opinion of the study. Saul heard David and his men did what from Keilah? They didn't just leave, they escaped. It's kind of an important word. If he found out Keilah assisted David and they sent him on his way merrily, it said Saul halted his journey. Where's Saul going to go if he hears it another way? If the word escaped is not used, if he's not told that, where's Saul going to continue to go? He's going to destroy the city. Probably so. I would think that they had. I mean, he knew he was there. David knew he was coming. You know, David probably always thought Saul was coming. You know, we feel like we know bad times are coming. You feel like it's going to happen when? At any time. Sometimes we can't control it. We can't predict it. But now David knows that Saul is coming. And he knows he has to protect the city, a city he just saved, of people who are not going to remain loyal to him. Is that a fault of theirs? It's not, is it? It's not. We can't hold them at fault for a bad king and what the king is doing to them. But it is kind of sad to think that a man in an army that just protected them, they won't take care of them. But they fear the king. They know he's going to punish them, and the loyalty was still required of them. They had to be loyal to him. So by having David escape, it says Saul halted the expedition, so he did not go any further. We have a few minutes left. Let's kind of talk about these. We always kind of try to learn some lessons from the prayers or the pleas that we have, and there's several here. There's two that are the same request, and then there's one later here when David is talking to God about Keilah and what they will do. We know God hears our prayer, and obviously here he answers. But God answered David because what did he have in mind for David? He was going to sit on the throne. He was his anointed. Samuel had anointed him out of the entire house of Jesse. He anointed David. And out of all the brothers, David was the youngest. We've seen that throughout the scriptures. The older serving the younger rising. We saw it with Joseph. You know, he was the youngest at the time before Benjamin was born. We've seen it with Isaac and Jacob. We've seen it time and time again. We saw it with Ishmael, didn't we? Ishmael was Abraham's oldest son, but he was not the heir. Isaac was. I said Isaac, Jacob and Esau. We saw it with them. Esau was older, but he was not chosen. We saw that in the prophecy before they were born. But God had a plan in place for David, and it was very distinct what he wanted to do with him. But we also see that people like Saul and his mindset, I want to go back and I want to look at this verse, and I read it, but I went back. I didn't really go over it deeper. Go back to verse 7. This is the mindset of Saul. Saul was told David had gone to Keilah, and Saul said, what? He didn't just say, David has gone to Keilah, the city is fortified, I can go get him. God has delivered him into my hand. How misguided is Saul? Very misguided. He's still at this point, even after Samuel's told him what? You've done wrong. You offered a profane sacrifice. You didn't listen to what you were commanded to do. Saul still believes what? That God is what? God is with him. God is still with Saul and the nation of Israel, but has God turned his back on Saul? He's not. The kingdom's not going to endure. We learned that for sure. But Saul had done what? He had turned his back on God. You know, I was watching on the TV this morning. I think it's channel 42. I can't remember which one it is, but there's a couple of Let the Bible Speak, and then I can't remember the other program. What is Truth? It may be, I can't remember, but they were talking about the idea of once saved, always saved, and the theory, the Calvinistic theory behind it. And it was really interesting, the points that they were making, and it sounds like this. Well, Saul believes what? I was chosen by God, I was anointed by God, so I still am, even though Samuel told him that he wasn't. And then we ask the question, we've already answered, but is it okay to ask for reassurance when we're not sure? Sometimes we need that from each other, don't we? Ask a question, get an answer, and then, sure? Are you sure? That's okay. What about fleeing from danger? David, he fled from Saul. Was that okay? Obviously, he had to. And we see that later on, don't we? Just here, we get up on that, and I'm not sure if that's part of any of the prayers. I haven't moved beyond this, but David did have opportunity, I think twice, to slay him, didn't he? In the cave, didn't he? If you'll remember, he had the opportunity, and what did David's servant tell him? Do it. And what did David say? Who am I to kill God's anointing? But knowing all along that Saul was not going to be what? He was not going to be a king forever. It was not going to continue through him. God's time. All this is on God's time, and that's, we have to understand that. We don't always understand time. Time aggravates us and drives us crazy. So, we see it all throughout the Psalms, don't we? There's going to be a lot of that in the sermon this morning, seeing some of the psalmists. It's 10:30. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Y'all are a little more active on Sunday morning than you are Wednesday nights. I have to pretend it's Sunday morning. Thank y'all.